Hello everyone. Welcome back to Midnight Murmurs. Tonight we descend into the frozen silence of Alaska, where small towns rest under endless snow, and isolation hides more than just the cold. These are 8 new disturbing true Alaskan small-town horror stories that reveal what really happens when the wilderness swallows entire communities. Official records rarely mention them. Old newspapers left only fragments. But survivor testimonies, missing person reports, and buried accounts speak of something else, something darker. A silence that is not peace, but warning. From fishing villages along the coast, to mining camps buried in the mountains, to quiet logging towns where time seems frozen, the truth lingers in whispers. But one story among them carries a secret, one so disturbing it was never meant to leave the north. The full truth. You'll only discover by the end, wherever you are, watching late at night in your room, or from a small town far from the city lights. Remember, Alaska is never as empty as it seems. If you are new here, subscribe to Midnight Murmurs for daily true horror content they never wanted you to uncover. And tell me in the comments, would you dare step into a place like this? I thought I was ready for solitude. The city had worn me down, endless noise, flashing lights, people everywhere. And the idea of a quiet cabin in the Alaskan wilderness felt like salvation. I parked my truck on the frost-crusted dirt road, the engine's rumble fading into the heavy silence. Snow stretched in every direction, broken only by the cabin's dark outline half swallowed by towering pines. I carried my bag inside, the wooden floor creaking beneath me, and set down my only companion for the next week, my leather-bound journal. The first night was quiet. Almost peaceful. I lit the fireplace and wrote about the long drive, the biting cold, the strange beauty of isolation. But when I looked down the next morning, my journal wasn't blank. Words neat and deliberate scrawled across the page in handwriting that wasn't mine. Simple sentences at first. You shouldn't be here. I see you. But they chilled me to the bone. I stared at them for what felt like hours, gripping my pen, trying to convince myself I'd forgotten writing them. But the handwriting was unmistakably foreign, yet eerily familiar. Something had entered my cabin overnight, and it wasn't human. The morning light barely pierced the thick layer of snow clinging to the windows, but I couldn't focus on anything but the journal. I flipped through the pages, heart hammering, and the entries continued. Lines I had no memory of writing, yet describing my every movement with unnerving accuracy. One sentence read, "He's pacing near the fireplace again, counting his breaths." I froze. I had counted my breaths, but I hadn't written it down. I tried to convince myself it was sleepwalking, some subconscious impulse, but the words grew more precise as the day went on. They described my morning coffee, the scrape of my boots against the wooden floor, even my hesitation at opening the creaking front door. Outside, the wind howled like a predator circling the cabin. The trees groaned under the weight of the snow, and the forest seemed impossibly alive, watching, waiting. By afternoon, a storm had rolled in, a sudden whiteout that trapped me inside. I kept the journal open in front of me, each new page forming sentences that predicted my own thoughts. He's afraid of the dark, yet he walks toward it anyway. I dropped the pen. I had thought that exact thought seconds earlier, but never spoken it aloud. Something was in the woods. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. Footsteps crunching in the fresh snow, too precise, too rhythmic to belong to any animal. Shadows shifted near the tree line, disappearing whenever I blinked. I tried calling for help, but my phone showed no signal. The world beyond the cabin had vanished. That night, the journal whispered to me in the dim glow of the fire. I couldn't tear my eyes away. The words were no longer just observations, they were warnings. The pages described things I hadn't yet experienced. The snap of a branch, the flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, the soft, almost human sigh that drifted from the snow outside. My heart raced as I realized I wasn't alone, and that whatever had taken an interest in my solitude was learning me, anticipating me, and maybe, just maybe, waiting to finish what it had begun. The next morning I barely slept. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind against the walls felt like a whisper calling my name. I opened the journal with trembling hands, half hoping it would finally be blank. It wasn't. The new entries were longer, more personal. They described thoughts I had never dared write down, fears I had hidden even from myself. He regrets leaving his old life behind. He thinks isolation will protect him, but he's wrong. I slammed the journal shut and pressed my palms to my face, my pulse hammering. The words weren't just predicting me, they were reading me, knowing my guilt, my regrets, my shame. I could almost hear the forest outside laughing at my helplessness. Every shadow cast by the trees seemed to lean closer, to pierce the thin walls of the cabin. By midday, curiosity overpowered fear. I forced myself to read more. The journal wasn't only observing, it was instructing. Do not leave the cabin, wait, he will come. My stomach nodded. Who, what? I tried to dismiss it as imagination, but every detail matched my reality. The sound of snow falling from the roof, the way the fire sputtered when I added wood. Even the ache in my shoulder from carrying supplies yesterday. I decided to investigate outside. Stepping into the blizzard, the wind bit through my jacket and visibility dropped to a few feet. Footprints surrounded the cabin, but they weren't mine. They circled, overlapped, vanished into the forest as if the snow itself had swallowed them. A low groan of the wind shifted into something almost human, almost mocking. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold my coat closed. Returning inside, I felt trapped. The journal had moved on to describing my panic, the way my hands fumbled the doorknob, the rapid breaths that fogged my window. Every word, every line drew me deeper into a reality I couldn't control. It wasn't merely a book. It was a window into a force I couldn't understand, something alive that knew me better than I knew myself. As night fell, I huddled near the fire, staring at the journal in horror. The last sentence written today made my blood run cold. Tonight he will see the eyes watching from the darkness. He will know they are not alone. Outside, the forest seemed to lean closer, pressing against the cabin, waiting, patient, eternal, and I realized that whatever had found me in this frozen wilderness wasn't going anywhere. The storm didn't let up. Snow drummed against the windows like fistfuls of ice, and the wind carried a low, mournful howl that seemed almost alive. I couldn't ignore the journal any longer. I opened it, hands shaking, and the words were waiting for me like predators in the dark. He is awake. He hears them too. They are close. I froze. I hadn't written that, but I had heard something. Soft footsteps crunching over the snow outside, stopping and starting, circling the cabin. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly moved toward the door. The beam pierced the whiteness outside, revealing nothing but thick snow and the twisted shadows of trees. Yet I knew something was out there, watching, waiting for me to slip. I could feel its gaze pressing against me, cold and patient. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I had lost all sense of time. The journal continued to fill itself, detailing movements I hadn't made yet. He looks over his shoulder. Something brushes the edge of his vision. He cannot turn fast enough. And then it happened. A shadow flickered at the corner of my eye. I spun, flashlight swinging wildly, and saw nothing. Only the snow, only the pines, only the oppressive quiet that made my chest tighten. The entries grew frantic, almost taunting me. They described my every thought. He wants to run, but he cannot. He thinks he is alone, but the eyes follow him, always. My heart hammered. Objects in the cabin shifted subtly. My mug tilted slightly. The fire flickered violently without wind. The door handle glimmered as if brushed by invisible hands. I realized the journal wasn't just predicting. It was orchestrating. By late evening, terror had overtaken reason. I wrapped myself in blankets near the fire, journal open before me, staring at the words that seemed to bleed off the page. The final line for the night was simple yet horrifying. He will meet them soon. They are patient, but they do not forget. A loud thump echoed through the cabin. My breath caught in my throat. Something heavy had struck the walls again and again. The journal's last sentence was no longer in ink, but in my mind. He will see them. I realized, with a cold certainty, that whatever was outside the cabin didn't just want to watch me. It wanted to make me part of the story. I couldn't stay in the cabin another second. The journal's entries had become commands, predictions, and threats all at once. He cannot escape. The snow will hide nothing. I grabbed the journal, yanking it close to my chest, and tried to force myself toward the door. The storm had intensified into a whiteout, snowflakes so thick I could barely see my own hands. Every step I took felt wrong, as if the forest itself was resisting me. I stumbled over uneven ground, and then I saw them. Shadows moving in the storm, glimpses of figures between the trees. They didn't walk like humans. Their motions were jerky, unnatural. Yet they mirrored mine, copying my every frantic move. I wanted to scream, but my voice was swallowed by the howl of the wind. The journal vibrated in my hands, pages rustling wildly, as if it were alive. New words appeared instantly. He tried to leave. He will fail. They are patient. They always finish what they start. I realized then that burning it or abandoning it wouldn't matter. Whatever force had possessed the journal had already tied itself to me. I ran blindly, tripping through deep snow, crashing into trees, hearing whispers all around me. The shadows followed, always at the edge of my vision. Then I stumbled into a clearing. A figure emerged, tall, featureless, yet unmistakably watching me. My chest tightened. It raised an arm, or what I thought was an arm, and the wind stilled for the first time, leaving only the sound of my frantic breathing. I dropped the journal. The figure remained still, and the snow around me seemed impossibly deep, pressing down, trapping me. He knows too much. He is ready, the journal wrote on its last visible page. I didn't dare approach. I didn't dare retreat. The shadows around the clearing shifted, merging into one dark, looming presence. I understood, in a way that went beyond fear, that I was not the one controlling the situation. The journal had led me here, and the cabin, the snow, the forest, they were all pieces of a trap I couldn't escape. I collapsed into the snow, staring at the darkness that moved like liquid around me. The last words appeared on the journal's page, glowing faintly in the dim light of the storm. He is mine now. There is no ending. Only the story. I woke to silence. The storm had passed, leaving the forest eerily still. My body ached from the cold, my hands numb, but the journal lay open beside me, its pages blank again, at least at first glance. I dared not touch it. The air smelled of snow and something faintly metallic like blood. The cabin was empty. No footprints but mine marred the fresh snow. Yet a chill crawled up my spine as I noticed the faint, almost imperceptible markings in the snow leading back into the trees. Too precise, too deliberate to be random. I realized the shadows, the figures, the forest itself, they hadn't gone. They were waiting, patient as ever, tethered to the journal, tied to me. I left the cabin, stumbling toward the faint glow of the horizon, my breath clouding in the frozen air. Behind me, the journal's last line seemed to echo in my mind. The story continues, whether he wants it or not. I don't know if I'll survive the wilderness, if I'll make it to civilization, or if I even want to. But one thing is certain. The journal hasn't finished with me. Its words, its presence follow me like a shadow. Wherever I go, the story waits. And deep down, I know I am no longer just a reader. I am part of it. Alaska has a way of swallowing sound. Out there on the frozen lake, it felt like I was the last living soul on Earth. Just me, my gear, and the kind of silence that makes your own heartbeat sound like a hammer against steel. The wind had died, the stars had dulled, and the ice beneath me seemed endless, stretching farther than the lantern's glow. I had come for the solitude, the clean air, the promise of fish untouched by man's greed. That's what I told myself anyway. But as I set my line and listened to the groan of shifting ice, I couldn't shake the feeling that the lake itself was watching me. At first, it was just a shimmer, like the ice catching starlight at the wrong angle, but then it shifted. Darker, clearer. Two shapes, round and impossibly steady, staring straight up from beneath the surface. I leaned closer, breath fogging against the glassy frost. My pulse stuttered. What I saw wasn't a reflection. It wasn't an illusion, they were eyes. Human eyes, wide, unblinking, locked on mine from beneath the ice. I should have listened to the locals. Everyone in the small Alaskan town had stories about this lake. Warnings wrapped in hushed tones and knowing looks. Don't go out there alone, they said. People vanish. The ice isn't what it seems. But I was stubborn. I wanted to see it for myself, to feel that untouched wilderness, to test my courage against the cold. The morning had been deceptively calm. The sun barely peeked over jagged mountains, scattering silver across the frozen surface. I parked my truck, unloaded my gear, and trudged across the snow until I found a spot thick enough to support my weight. My breath came in clouds, mingling with the frozen mist rising from the lake, and for a moment I felt free. Alone, yes, but alive in a way the city never allowed. I drilled my first hole, the auger whining against the ice, and dropped my line. The quiet stretched, broken only by the creaks and groans of the frozen water. But the more time I spent on that ice, the more unnerving it became. Shadows seemed to shift under the surface. The line in my hands twitched without a bite. And every time I glanced down, the ice looked like it was moving. I tried to brush it off. I told myself it was just the sun playing tricks, the water freezing in weird patterns, or maybe fatigue from the drive. But then I felt it, eyes. Not in my head, not imagined. Something beneath the ice was looking straight at me, and the deeper I stared, the more I realized the shapes weren't fish, weren't debris. They were too deliberate, too patient. My pulse quickened. The lake, which had seemed so inviting, suddenly felt like a trap. Every ripple of wind, every groan of ice became a warning. I packed away the fishing rod, telling myself to step back, to give the water some space. But I couldn't. Something about those eyes refused to let me leave. They were waiting, and I had no idea how long they'd been there. By mid-afternoon, the temperature had dropped further, and the sky darkened with the promise of a storm. The ice beneath me began to groan in ways I hadn't noticed before, shallow cracks forming, spiderwebbing outward from my feet. At first I thought it was just normal settling, the way thick ice shifts, but then came the tapping, light, irregular, like knuckles rapping against glass. I froze, listening. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't coming from above. It was beneath me. My stomach twisted into knots. Every instinct screamed to leave, yet I couldn't look away from the faint shadows moving under the frozen surface. I pressed my palm against the ice, testing its strength. Nothing shifted, nothing gave, but the shadows moved with unnatural speed, darting back and forth beneath the frozen lake. They were too big to be fish, too fluid to be rocks or debris. Then the tapping turned rhythmic, almost like someone knocking to be let out. I tried to rationalize it. Currents, water trapped under ice. But the cadence was deliberate, intelligent. My heart hammered in my chest. I held the flashlight closer, its weak beam trembling against the crystalline ice. That's when I saw it. Dark shapes, blurry at first, emerging slowly, circling beneath my feet. Eyes. Not just one pair, but dozens, scattered and blinking, or maybe unblinking. Some were deep black, others hazel, all staring directly at me. Panic clawed at my chest. I stumbled back a step, ice groaning and threatening to crack. My mind screamed to run, but curiosity held me rooted. What were they? People? Something else? The rational part of me tried to convince myself it was a trick of light. Shadows distorted beneath layers of ice and snow, but instinct told me otherwise. The tapping grew louder, closer, the rhythm echoing in my skull. I realized then that I wasn't simply being observed. I was being hunted. The lake wasn't just frozen water. It was a cage, and I was standing on top of it, completely exposed. I forced myself to step back, but every movement felt watched, calculated. The shadows darted closer to the surface. The eyes followed me with an intensity that no animal could have. Something beneath the ice wanted me to see it, wanted me to know it was there, and I wasn't ready for what would happen when I finally did. I couldn't resist any longer. My flashlight beam pierced the ice, trembling in my gloved hands as I pressed closer to the shapes beneath the frozen surface. The eyes were everywhere now. Dozens of them, some wide and terrified, others cold and calculating. Faces began to emerge, frozen expressions locked in silent screams, pale features distorted by layers of ice. My stomach churned. Some of them looked alive. Their movements were deliberate, intentional, following every flicker of my flashlight, every twitch of my fingers. My breath came in ragged clouds, fogging the beam, but I couldn't look away. It was like staring into a mirror of horrors. A reflection I didn't recognize, a world trapped beneath a layer of glassy water. I tried to step back, but the ice groaned under my weight, spreading fine cracks outward like spiderwebs. The lake seemed to shiver in anticipation, responding to my fear. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, but a dark curiosity rooted me in place. One pair of eyes moved differently from the others. It shifted slowly, deliberate, as if recognizing me personally. I froze. My heartbeat thundered, echoing across the frozen expanse. That pair of eyes wasn't just watching, it was studying me. A sudden tap jolted me, coming directly beneath my feet. I stumbled, nearly falling onto the ice. The eyes followed, unblinking, patient, as if daring me to make a mistake. My mind raced with impossible questions. How long had they been there? Were they people? Spirits? Something older? Something alive beneath the ice? I tried to rationalize, to tell myself it was hallucination, but as my gaze swept across the surface, I saw movement beyond the eyes, shapes rising slowly, pushing against the ice from below. Bubbles escaped in patterns that twisted into faint whispers, unintelligible words carried through frozen water. The terror was total. My hands shook violently, my legs quivering, but the longer I stared, the more I understood the truth. The lake was alive in a way I couldn't comprehend, and I was the intruder. The eyes weren't just watching. They were waiting. Waiting for me to do something, anything that might tip the balance, and in that moment, the realization struck me with icy clarity. Some of them weren't dead. I stumbled back, my boots scraping against the ice, sending tiny cracks radiating outward. Panic surged through me like wildfire. The storm that had been gathering all day finally broke, snow whipping across the lake, blurring the lantern's light. The ice groaned, deep fissures spreading in spirals around me, as if the lake itself was reacting to my presence. The eyes pressed closer to the surface. Dozens of pale faces now visible, mouths open in silent screams, their expressions frozen in eternal terror. The bubbles rising from beneath twisted into shapes that almost looked like words, fragments of whispered pleas or warnings I couldn't understand. The wind carried them faintly, teasing my ears with voices that sounded like my own, echoing my panic back at me. I turned to flee, sliding across the ice, but it was no use. Every step made the fissures grow, the surface threatening to crack entirely. The eyes followed relentlessly, their gaze magnetic, pulling me toward them. My heart pounded. Every instinct screamed that the lake wanted me, and not just my attention. It wanted me inside. I scrambled to my truck, but the snowstorm had erased all landmarks. The shoreline blurred into an endless white expanse. I felt invisible fingers beneath the ice, tugging at my boots, my legs, pulling me closer to the frozen depths. I screamed into the storm, but it swallowed the sound, leaving only my ragged breathing and the distant tapping echoing in rhythm with my heartbeat. Desperation clawed at me. I tried running, sliding, throwing myself forward, anything to escape the invisible grip. But the lake's surface undulated unnaturally beneath my feet, guiding me, corralling me, forcing me closer to those eyes. One pair of them, darker than the rest, followed every movement, tracking me with intelligence and purpose. When the cold became unbearable, when exhaustion threatened to pull me down, I made a final, desperate dash. My body hit the bank, snow spraying in every direction. I tumbled onto solid ground, gasping, heart hammering, lungs burning, convinced I had escaped. But as I lay there, chest heaving, I could still feel them beneath me. The eyes watching, patient, waiting, and I knew, with a dread that froze me deeper than the ice itself, that the lake would never let me truly go. Morning came like a faint promise, pale light spilling over the frozen expanse. The storm had passed, leaving the lake eerily pristine. I lay on the bank, frostbitten and trembling, trying to convince myself it had been a hallucination, a product of fear and isolation. My fishing gear was gone, swallowed by the snow or the ice itself, but the footprints leading to the water remained, mine alone ending abruptly at the lake's edge. Locals arrived later, murmuring concerns about the storm and hypothermia. They wrapped me in blankets, guided me back to town, and spoke in tones that tried to make sense of my incoherent explanations. They nodded politely at my claims, dismissing them as exhaustion and paranoia. But as I removed my boots to warm my frozen toes, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My socks were wet, not from melted snow, but soaked through with ice-cold water freezing against my skin. And when I looked at the lake from the truck window, for a fraction of a second, I swore I saw hundreds of tiny black eyes shimmering beneath its surface. Waiting, patient, unblinking. I drove away, refusing to look back, but deep down I knew the truth. The lake hadn't let me go. It never would. The eyes were still watching. I never thought a winter trip to Alaska would end like this. I remember staring out the frost-covered window of the rental van, the landscape a frozen wasteland stretching farther than my eyes could reach, and feeling a thrill I now wish I could take back. The mountains loomed like silent giants, dark against the pale gray sky, and the wind howled in a way that made my bones ache before we even stepped outside. We laughed at first, my friends joking about the cold, the isolation, the possibility of running into wolves or bears. I laughed too, because that's what you do when you don't want to admit the creeping unease curling around your chest. The moment we crossed the last bridge before the road disappeared into nothing but ice and snow. I sensed it. The subtle shift in the air, the kind of quiet that feels loud. Something was watching. Something was waiting. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself it was the wind or my imagination. But then I saw tracks in the snow beside the road, too large to be any animal I knew, and they weren't ours. My stomach twisted, a knot of fear tightening as the van continued to rattle along the desolate highway, and I realized somewhere deep inside that nothing would go the way we planned. We'd set out early that morning, the sun barely scraping the horizon, casting a pale orange glow over the endless ice. My friends were in high spirits, joking about how Alaska would break us before we even got to the real wilderness. I wanted to believe them, to laugh along, but every mile we drove felt heavier, as if the snow itself was pressing down on us. The roads narrowed, the edges disappearing under thick layers of frost, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were crossing into a place that didn't belong to humans anymore. By mid-morning, the wind had picked up. It slammed against the van, rattling the doors, and I felt my hands tighten around the steering wheel. My friends tried to ignore it, making small talk, but even their voices sounded brittle against the roar of the storm outside. Then I noticed it, shadows flitting at the tree line, too fast, too deliberate to be animals. I blinked and they were gone. I wanted to say something, to warn everyone, but the words caught in my throat. We stopped at a small clearing to stretch, snow crunching beneath our boots. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional distant snap of ice or a crow's harsh cry. One of my friends, the bravest or perhaps the stupidest, decided to explore a nearby path, laughing as he disappeared between the trees. I waited, calling his name, but the wind swallowed it instantly. Then I heard a low guttural growl behind us. My heart jumped into my throat. We never did see what it was. By the time we got back to the van, my friend was pale, shaken, and wouldn't stop muttering about movement in the shadows. Something was wrong, that much I knew. I could see it in the way the snow seemed to press closer around us, the way the forest swallowed sound and light. We had crossed the line between adventure and danger, and I could feel it, crawling into my chest like ice. Alaska wasn't just cold, it was hungry, patient, and merciless, and we were nothing more than trespassers in its frozen domain. By late afternoon, the storm had swallowed the sky entirely. What little light remained was gray and flat, giving the snow a sickly, unnatural glow. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, and every gust of wind felt like it carried the weight of the entire wilderness pressing down on us. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white, trying to convince myself the road was still there beneath the ice. But deep down I knew we were no longer in control. That's when it started. First with small things easily dismissible, a branch snapping too close, a fleeting shadow that didn't belong. Then the chaos came. My friend who had been laughing earlier suddenly screamed, pointing at the tree line. There, just beyond the van, I saw it, a dark shape moving with impossible speed, disappearing into the storm as quickly as it appeared. Panic spread through the group like wildfire. Arguments erupted. Some wanted to turn back. Others insisted we keep going. I remember yelling over the wind, my voice cracking, trying to reason, trying to impose order, but it was useless. And then, the first casualty. One of my friends slipped on the ice near the edge of the road, tumbling down into a ravine hidden beneath the snow. The scream still haunts me. We tried to pull him out, but the storm had grown too fierce, the snow too deep. By the time we made it back to the van, I knew it was only the beginning. Fear had rooted itself in my chest, cold and unrelenting. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell. Time had dissolved into the wind and the endless white. Another friend vanished while checking the rear tires. One by one, the group thinned, swallowed by the storm, by the tree line, by whatever lurked just beyond our sight. I was frozen, not just from the cold, but from disbelief, from the crushing realization that survival was no longer a choice. It was a desperate, impossible necessity. By nightfall, I was alone in the van, headlights cutting weak beams into the swirling snow. The storm roared, masking every sound but my own ragged breathing. I wanted to cry, to scream, but my voice felt trapped, useless against the vast, merciless wilderness. And in that silence, I felt it, the weight of eyes on me, watching, waiting, knowing that the forest, the storm, and whatever else was out there had already claimed everything else. The night was endless. I couldn't tell if I had dozed for a few minutes or hours. The storm had erased all sense of time. The van had become both my refuge and my prison, shaking under the wind's relentless assault. Every shadow outside the frosted windows seemed alive, stretching and twisting with malevolent intent. I could feel my mind fraying, the edges of reality blurring with fear and exhaustion. I tried to stay rational. I checked the map, my phone, anything that could help me make sense of where I was. Nothing. The forest had swallowed the roads. GPS signals flickered and died, and the silence between gusts of wind felt heavier than the storm itself. And then came the noises. The faint scratching, the soft thumps against the van, the whisper of movement just beyond sight. I pressed my back against the door, trying to convince myself it was animals, wolves, bears, something natural. But deep down I knew it wasn't. Hunger gnawed at me, cold gnawed at me, and the storm gnawed at my sanity. I hallucinated shapes sliding across the snow, voices calling my name. My friends' faces twisted in fear, appearing and disappearing in the frosted glass. I screamed once, and the sound felt swallowed instantly, as though the wilderness itself were mocking me. By morning, everything outside had changed. The storm had left a thick, unnatural fog, and the tracks in the snow were no longer familiar. They were jagged, deep, and impossible to place. I followed them, desperate for any sign of life, any clue, but they led me nowhere. Sometimes I thought I saw someone standing at the edge of the trees, motionless, watching me. When I called out, the echo came back wrong, warped, like the voice of someone long gone. I realized then that survival wasn't just about keeping warm or finding food. It was about keeping my mind intact, about resisting the pull of whatever had claimed the others. Every step I took was careful, calculated, but every shadow, every gust of wind made me question whether I was walking towards safety or straight into the thing that had haunted us from the beginning. And in that moment I understood the most terrifying truth. In the Alaskan wilderness, you are never truly alone. Something is always there, waiting, patient and hungry. By the time I reached the next ridge, the storm had died down just enough for me to see the world in pale, ghostly light. Everything was unrecognizable. Trees broken like matchsticks, snowdrifts taller than my head, the road buried beneath a frozen wasteland. My muscles ached from hours of climbing through the knee-deep snow. My fingers numb despite every glove I owned. Fear had become a constant companion, whispering in my ears with every step, reminding me that one wrong move could mean the end. Then I heard it again, a low, resonant growl, echoing across the ridge like it belonged to the wind itself. I froze, straining my eyes through the haze. Nothing moved at first, just the snow swirling gently around the trees. But then I saw it, a dark figure, larger than any bear I had ever known, hunched and moving with unnatural speed. My stomach clenched, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had nowhere to run. The ridge dropped sharply on either side, and the snow under my boots threatened to give way at any moment. I considered hiding, curling into the snow, letting it pass. But instinct screamed at me to keep moving, to stay alive no matter what. Each step was agony, a delicate balance between exhaustion and the icy grip of terror. I could feel the creature following, close enough that the cold air it displaced brushed my face. I told myself it was a hallucination, that fear had made me see things, but the shadow's weight was undeniable. Hours blurred into an endless trudge. At one point I stumbled and nearly fell into a crevasse hidden beneath the snow. The sound of cracking ice was deafening, and I scrambled desperately to pull myself back. I realized then that survival was about more than endurance. It was about will, about refusing to let fear become my master. By evening, the forest thinned, and I saw something I had not dared hope for. The faint outline of a cabin, smoke curling from its chimney. Relief surged through me, a fragile hope I hadn't felt in days. But even as I staggered toward it, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes in the trees, watching, waiting. I had survived the storm, the wilderness, and whatever hunted the others, but I knew, deep down, that the Alaskan winter wasn't done with me yet. I reached the cabin just as darkness fell, my body trembling from cold, hunger, and sheer exhaustion. The door was heavy, the lock frozen, but I managed to push it open and step inside. The warmth hit me like a wave, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe without the gnawing terror of the storm and the shadows outside. The cabin was empty, abandoned, but it didn't matter. I was alive. Sitting by the fire, I tried to piece together what had happened. My friends, they were gone. I could still see their faces in the snow, hear their voices carried on the wind. Guilt clawed at me, sharp and unrelenting, and I realized survival came with a price far heavier than I had imagined. I had endured, but the Alaskan wilderness had left its mark, etching fear into my very bones. I know I will never forget those days. Never forget the icy eyes that watched me from the tree line, the cruel whispers of the storm. I am the only one who made it out, but the memory of what I lost and what I barely escaped will haunt me for the rest of my life. Alaska didn't just test me. It claimed everyone else, leaving me alone with its cold, patient darkness. I should have never taken that trip alone. When people ask me about Alaska, I don't think about the mountains or the endless sky or the stillness of the forest. I think about the sound of something moving through the dark, something that should never have been there. It started like any other road trip. I wanted freedom, the kind of escape you can only get on an empty highway where it feels like the world has no edges. But Alaska doesn't forgive mistakes, and I made the worst one of all. I thought I could wander off the map and find my own way back. The wilderness has a silence to it that doesn't feel natural. It's too heavy, too knowing. When I realized I was lost, that silence pressed in on me, and I swear it wasn't empty. There was something else breathing in it. Most people think getting lost in the woods is just about hunger, cold, or bad luck. But that's not what kept me awake at night. What terrified me wasn't the snow or the dark or even death itself. It was knowing that I wasn't alone out there. Something followed me. The trip started out with nothing but good intentions. I'd packed my truck with supplies, mapped out my route, and planned to take a few days off-grid. Everyone I'd talked to back home had warned me the same thing. Stick to the marked roads, don't get clever, and don't think you can outsmart the land. Alaska doesn't care who you are. Out there, the wilderness always wins. At first, it was beautiful. I drove through valleys where the peaks rose like teeth, sharp and snow-capped against a sky so clear it almost hurt to look at. For hours, I didn't see another car, just endless pines, frozen lakes, and long, winding stretches of road that seemed to fold into nowhere. It felt like freedom. It felt like I was the only person left in the world. But the deeper I drove, the stranger it felt. I passed an old gas station boarded up tight, its pumps rusting and half buried in snow. A little farther, I saw what looked like claw marks scored deep into a tree by the roadside, the grooves fresh and raw. I told myself it was probably a bear. Bears were common enough, but then I noticed how the woods had gone quiet. No birds, no wind, no sound at all, like the whole forest was holding its breath. By late afternoon, I saw a narrow path branching off the main road, half hidden under frost. It wasn't on my map, but curiosity got the better of me. I figured it was a shortcut, maybe a service road leading back toward the highway. I told myself it would be fine. The path narrowed quickly, the trees crowding in on both sides. Snow crunched under my tires and I drove slower, watching the daylight bleed away. My gut told me to turn back, but there wasn't room to flip around. When the track finally ended in a wall of trees, I killed the engine and stepped out into the cold. That was when I realized just how far off the road I really was. The forest was too dense to see the sky. No landmarks, no sound of traffic, not even the faint hum of the highway. I wasn't on the map anymore, and for the first time I felt it, the sense that someone or something was already watching me. Night in the Alaskan wilderness isn't like anywhere else. The dark feels heavier, thicker, like it presses down on you until you can hardly breathe. I told myself I'd backtrack in the morning, but the cold was already seeping through my jacket and I needed to make a fire. That's when I heard it. The first sound that convinced me I wasn't alone. It started as a snap, sharp and clean, like a branch breaking under weight. I froze, listening. The forest was still again, almost mocking me for flinching. I struck a match, lit some dry tinder, and tried to focus on the fire. But then came the second sound, heavier, closer. Something big was moving between the trees. I tried to convince myself it was a moose, maybe a bear. But when I checked the ground at dawn, I found tracks in the snow. They were long, narrow impressions, too wide for a wolf, too clean for any deer. They didn't look like anything I'd seen before. And worse, they circled my camp. As the sun rose, I tried retracing the tire marks back toward the road, but the snow had already covered them. Every direction looked the same, endless trees standing like silent walls. I kept walking, hoping for a break in the tree line, a power line, a cabin, anything. Instead, I found more signs. Bark stripped from trunks in ragged chunks like claws had torn into them, a patch of ground where the snow had been melted away, darkened with something I prayed wasn't blood, and the smell. faint, metallic, sharp in the back of my throat. The forest seemed to grow quieter with each step, until silence wasn't just silence anymore. It was listening, watching. By late afternoon, the sky had turned gray and low, and the wind carried whispers through the branches. Not words exactly, but a rhythm that didn't sound natural. I could feel my pulse hammering in my neck, every instinct screaming to keep moving. When the third night fell, I barely slept. I lay in the dark, clutching a half-burnt stick from my fire like it could protect me. That's when I heard it again, not the snap of branches this time. Breathing, slow, deep, steady. Something was standing just beyond the light of my dying fire. I don't remember deciding to move. 1 second I was lying frozen in my sleeping bag, and the next I was stumbling through the trees, clutching my pack like it was the only thing keeping me alive. The breathing had stopped, but that was worse somehow. Silence meant it was waiting. The woods twisted endlessly. My flashlight beam danced across bark and snow, but every shadow looked alive. Just when panic threatened to break me, I saw it. A slanted roof, half collapsed, hidden among the pines. A ranger outpost, maybe abandoned decades ago. The door sagged on its hinges, but I forced it open and stepped into the dark. The smell hit first: mildew, smoke, something rotten lingering in the walls. My light revealed broken furniture, a rusted stove, and scattered papers across the floor. I wasn't the first to end up here. In the corner sat a desk with a waterlogged journal. The pages crumbled as I turned them, but I could still read enough. Notes about strange tracks, warnings about people going missing, scribbles that grew more frantic the further I read. The last line was carved into the wood itself, jagged and desperate. It follows. It learns. My hands shook as I slammed the journal shut. A sound echoed outside. Slow, deliberate steps circling the cabin. I killed my flashlight and crouched low, praying the rotten boards wouldn't creak. The steps paused, then came a sound like claws dragging across the siding. I held my breath, but then it knocked. Not random pounding, not an animal's thrash, a knock. 3 sharp raps on the wall, spaced evenly like it was mocking the rhythm of a human hand. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. I gripped the rusted poker I'd found near the stove, though I knew it would do nothing. The knocking stopped. For a moment I thought it was gone. Then from the other side of the room came another sound, a low, guttural rasp, almost like a voice trying to form words it didn't understand. That was when I knew. Whatever was out there wasn't just some predator. It was something else. Something that had been out here long before me, and it wasn't leaving. I didn't wait for the dawn. The moment the rasping faded, I bolted from the outpost and plunged back into the trees. Snow whipped against my face, branches clawed at my clothes, but I didn't care. Staying in that cabin felt like waiting to die. The forest wasn't silent anymore. It was alive with movement. Shadows flickering at the edge of my vision, the crunch of footsteps mirroring my own. I kept running, lungs burning, heart pounding so loud I thought it might give me away. Every time I glanced back, I swore I saw something dart between the trees. Tall, hunched, pale against the dark. I stumbled downhill, desperate for any sign of escape, and found myself at the edge of a frozen river. The ice stretched wide, glistening under the faint moonlight. It was dangerous, but so was staying where I was. Behind me, the sound came again, that slow, deliberate breathing, closer than ever. I stepped onto the ice. It groaned under my weight, cracks spiderwebbing across its surface. I shuffled forward, teeth clenched, praying it would hold. Halfway across, I heard it step onto the ice behind me. The sound was wrong. Too heavy, too measured, like something imitating a human stride but not quite getting it right. I didn't look back. I just ran. My boots slipped, the ice screeching with each step, but adrenaline kept me moving. The breathing grew louder, the scrape of claws ringing out behind me. I felt the air shift like it was reaching for me, and then the forest opened. On the far bank through the trees, I saw faint light. A lantern? Headlights? I didn't care. I sprinted, throwing myself onto solid ground as the ice groaned and cracked behind me. When I turned, there was nothing. Just the river, broken in places where the water churned beneath. No glowing eyes, no pale figure, no sound at all, but I knew better. It hadn't fallen through. It hadn't given up. It was letting me go. Letting me believe I was safe, and that was worse than seeing it. Because whatever it was, it wanted me to keep running. I don't remember how long I wandered after the river. Hours, maybe days. The woods blurred together until I was running on nothing but instinct and fear. When I finally stumbled onto a dirt road, my legs nearly gave out beneath me. I waved my arms, screamed until my voice broke. Headlights cut through the dark and a truck screeched to a stop. Two hunters jumped out, pulling me into the warmth of their cab. I must have looked half dead. Clothes torn, face frostbitten, eyes wide like a cornered animal. They asked what happened, but I couldn't answer. Not really. Back in town, I tried to explain. I said something was out there, something that wasn't supposed to exist. They just exchanged looks, the kind people give when they think you've lost your mind. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw. Even now, safe in my own bed, I can't escape it. At night, I hear the same slow breathing outside my window, steady and patient, like it never stopped following me. Alaska doesn't forgive mistakes, and I made one I'll never undo. Because out there in that wilderness, something found me and it isn't finished yet. I came to Alaska for silence. That was the whole point. After years of grinding shifts and city noise that never stopped, I wanted to disappear for a while, to feel the weight of snow pressing in on a roof, to hear nothing but the crack of wood in a stove. The cabin was 3 hours from the nearest town, sitting on the edge of endless trees with a lake frozen so thick it looked like steel under the moon. People warned me about bears, about wolves, about the kind of cold that kills faster than hunger. But they never mentioned what I should really be afraid of. The first nights were quiet, almost too quiet, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Then I started hearing things. A sound in the snow that didn't match the wind, faint crunches like something moving, pausing, listening. At first I told myself it was just animals, until one morning I opened the door and saw them. Footprints. They weren't shaped like boots and they weren't paw prints. They were long, almost human, but bent wrong, stretched like something had walked on bones that didn't fit, and they circled the cabin. The first time I saw those prints, I told myself I was overreacting. Snow does strange things out here, shifting under wind, melting in the sun, and freezing back into distorted shapes. I stared at them for a long time, the pale morning light stretching across the frozen lake, and tried to convince myself they were nothing more than tracks left by a wandering moose or maybe even a person passing through in odd snowshoes. But the longer I looked, the more wrong they seemed. They didn't have the clean oval of an animal's foot or the sharp marks of claws. They were narrow, elongated, with toes, or something like toes, curling in ways that felt unnatural. That night, I couldn't stop glancing at the windows. The wind rattled the glass, pressing snow against the corners of the cabin, and every creak of the wood made me tense. I'd chosen this cabin because it was supposed to be safe, built sturdy against storms, stocked with canned food and firewood. Yet lying there, staring at the ceiling beams, I felt like I was being watched. On the third night, I heard it again. A crunch, deliberate this time, just outside the wall near my bed. I froze, my breath clouding in the dark, and waited for it to pass. It didn't. The sound lingered, pacing like whatever it was knew I was inside. When the morning finally came, I forced myself to check. I opened the door slowly, half expecting something to be waiting there. Nothing moved, but the prints were back. Fresh ones, newer than the first. They ran in a broken circle around the cabin, stopping at the windows, pressing close as though whoever or whatever had leaned in to look. I found myself whispering aloud, trying to calm my nerves. It's just the cold, just the snow. My voice sounded small in the empty air. By the fifth day, I noticed something worse. The prints weren't wandering anymore. They led straight from the tree line to my door, pausing there like a question, and each morning, no matter how I shoveled them away or covered them with snow, new ones appeared, always closer, always waiting. The storm rolled in on the seventh night, a white curtain swallowing the world outside. The wind howled against the roof, snow piling higher and higher against the walls, but through all that chaos I could hear something else. A dull thud, soft but steady, tapping against the cabin like knuckles on wood. At first I thought it was a tree branch shifting in the storm, but the rhythm was wrong, too deliberate. 3 taps, then silence. A pause long enough to make my chest ache. Then 3 more. I pressed my ear to the log wall, heart hammering. The knock seemed to move, traveling from one corner of the cabin to another, circling me the way those prints did in the snow. I didn't dare open the door. Instead, I sat with the lantern lit, shotgun across my lap, and waited for the sound to stop. But it never fully did. Even when I drifted into uneasy sleep, I swore I could hear faint crunches outside, pacing, circling, patient. The next morning, I found the snow around the cabin mangled. Dozens of tracks layered over each other, spiraling outward, leading to places no living thing could climb. I tilted my head back, squinting into the pale daylight, and felt my stomach drop. Prints ran across the roof. Not claw marks, not paw scrapes, footprints. That night I nailed blankets over the windows as if cloth could stop whatever was out there. Still, I saw shadows moving through the gaps, tall, spindly shapes drifting across the snow. Once, just before dawn, I swore I caught the faintest glimpse of fingers curling over the window frame, long and sharp, before vanishing when I blinked. Every sound became unbearable. The groan of the cabin as the snow weighed it down, the distant crack of ice on the lake. Even the silence felt wrong, as if something enormous crouched outside, holding still, waiting for me to make the mistake of opening the door. I tried to rationalize again. Maybe hunters, I thought. Some twisted prank to scare the outsider in the woods. But deep down I knew no prank could explain prints that ended halfway across the frozen lake, or the way the knocks on the walls seemed to come from places no person could reach. I woke to silence so deep it felt like the world had stopped breathing. The generator had died sometime in the night, leaving the cabin swallowed in darkness. No hum of power, no orange glow from the heater, only the faint hiss of wind through cracks in the wood. My breath fogged in front of me as I lit the lantern, its weak flame throwing shadows that seemed to bend and stretch too far across the walls. The moment the light caught the window, I froze. Something moved just beyond the glass. Not fast, not darting away like an animal, but slow, deliberate, like it wanted me to see. A tall silhouette lingered near the tree line, its arms hanging lower than they should, its head cocked unnaturally to the side. I blinked and it was gone, swallowed by the trees. But when I stepped outside at first light, the truth hit harder than any nightmare. The prints were back, dozens of them, leading straight to the shed 20 yards from the cabin. My gut twisted as I trudged across the snow, shotgun gripped tight. The shed door creaked when I pulled it open, and the smell hit me immediately. Damp wood, iron, and something foul I couldn't place. The prints were inside, stamped deep into the dirt floor. Not just one set anymore, several. I backed out slowly, forcing myself not to run. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the lantern. Whatever was making those tracks wasn't just circling me anymore. It was moving closer, exploring, testing. That night I barricaded the door with furniture, piling chairs and logs against it, though I knew it wouldn't matter if something truly wanted in. Hours passed, and then the scratching started. Light at first, like twigs dragging across the wood, then harder, scraping deep. Fingernails or claws raking against the doorframe. The sound shifted to the windows, then the walls, circling, circling. I clutched the shotgun to my chest, whispering to myself that morning would come, that nothing could last forever. But as the lantern sputtered low, I heard it, breathing. Slow, wet, heavy breaths seeping through the cracks in the wood, inches from where I sat. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have drifted off in that chair, shotgun across my lap, because when I opened my eyes again, the lantern was dead. The cabin was drowned in pitch black, and for a moment I thought maybe the scratching had only been a dream. Then came the sound, a faint click like claws against wood just inches from my ear. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly I lifted the lantern and struck a match, my fingers trembling so violently the flame almost went out. The light flared, and something moved in the corner of the room. It was inside. At first my mind refused to accept what I was seeing. The figure was too tall, its head brushing the rafters, arms hanging so low the fingertips nearly touched the floor. The skin was pale, stretched too tight over long bones, and where eyes should have been were pits that glowed faintly, reflecting the lantern's flicker like glass in the dark. I stumbled backward, knocking over the chair, the shotgun clattering against the floorboards. The thing tilted its head at the sound, slow, deliberate, as though listening more than looking. Then it moved, one step long and deliberate, the floor creaking beneath it. Panic surged through me. I snatched the shotgun, fired blindly. The blast shattered the silence, echoing like thunder, smoke filling the cabin. When the haze cleared, the doorway was empty. But the prints were there, stamped deep into the wood leading back out into the night. The next minutes blurred. I threw open the door, lantern swinging wildly, and saw them. Dozens of prints scattered across the snow, circling, multiplying, stretching toward the trees. But one set was fresh, leading away. dragging long grooves like it had crawled more than walked. I knew I couldn't stay. Not another night. My body shook with cold and fear as I packed what little I could, stuffing food and matches into a bag. The woods were black, the snow waist-deep, but staying meant waiting for it to return. And I knew it would, so I stepped into the storm, leaving the cabin behind. The footprints stretching ahead into darkness I had no choice but to follow. I don't remember how long I walked that night. The storm blurred everything, the trees bending under the weight of snow, my lantern burning lower with every step. My legs ached, lungs raw from the frozen air, but fear pushed me forward. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I expected to see it there, tall and silent, slipping between the trees, waiting for me to collapse. By dawn, I stumbled onto a narrow road, half buried under snowdrifts. I followed it blindly until I saw the ranger station, its roof heavy with ice, smoke curling from the chimney. Relief nearly dropped me to my knees. Someone was inside, someone human. I pounded on the door until my knuckles bled, and when it opened, I nearly collapsed in the man's arms. He asked if I was hurt, if I was lost. I tried to answer, but my throat locked, words tangled by exhaustion and terror. All I could do was point back toward the trees. That's when I saw it. Fresh snow blanketed the ground around the station, but it wasn't clean. The same elongated prints circled the building, pressed deep into the white, looping endlessly, and they weren't mine. I've driven through some brutal winters in my life, but nothing prepared me for the Alaskan wilderness in the dead of January. Out there, the cold doesn't just sting, it crawls under your skin, settles in your bones, and waits for you to slow down. The locals always said that blizzards weren't the only thing to fear in those empty stretches of highway, but I thought they meant frostbite, or maybe getting stranded. I didn't realize they meant something else entirely. That night, the storm rolled in faster than I could react. One moment the sky was clear, the moon lighting up the mountains, and the next the world turned white. Snow hammered the windshield, wipers squealing uselessly, and the road vanished beneath me. My truck felt like a coffin on wheels, the heater fighting a losing battle against the cold pressing in from every side. I remember gripping the wheel, knuckles bone white, whispering to myself just to hear a voice in the silence. But the silence didn't last. Somewhere in that storm, buried in the roar of the wind, I heard it. Something that wasn't weather. Something that shouldn't have been there. And that was when I realized I wasn't alone. The storm swallowed me whole, and the road disappeared beneath a sea of white. My headlights caught nothing but snowflakes whipping sideways in a frenzy, as if the night itself was trying to erase me. I slowed to a crawl, straining to see the faint yellow lines that should have been guiding me, but they'd already been buried. Every instinct told me to keep moving, but every second I drove deeper into that storm, the more I knew I was gambling with my life. I pulled over onto the shoulder, or at least where I thought the shoulder was, and cut the engine. The silence was suffocating. Only the wind screamed outside, battering the truck like fists on metal. I thought about waiting it out, but the temperature inside was already dropping fast. I wasn't prepared to die shivering in my seat. That's when I spotted it. Through the blur of snow, a dark outline. Maybe 50 yards away, a cabin. It looked abandoned. The kind of structure hunters leave behind, leaning against the trees like it had been forgotten decades ago. But to me it was salvation. I grabbed my pack, pulled my coat tighter, and forced myself into the storm. Every step was a battle. The snow clawed at my boots, the wind nearly knocked me off my feet, but I kept moving, eyes fixed on that silhouette. When I finally reached it, my hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped the handle. The door wasn't locked. It creaked open, groaning like something alive, and I stepped inside. Warmth didn't greet me, just stillness. The air smelled of old wood and dampness, but it was shelter. My flashlight swept across the single room. A stove in the corner, a rickety table, a cot shoved against the wall. And then I noticed the details. A mug half full of something frozen solid, a pair of boots by the door, dusted with snow but not buried in it. The cot's blanket crumpled as if someone had just risen from it. My heart thudded. This place wasn't abandoned. I shut the door against the howling wind, the sound of it muffled but not gone. The storm might not kill me tonight, but for the first time I wondered if something else would. The wind pressed against the cabin walls like a living thing, rattling the boards, moaning through unseen cracks. I huddled near the stove, rubbing my hands together, praying for some leftover firewood. To my relief, a small stack waited in the corner. I lit it, coaxing the flames until they licked upward, filling the room with a faint glow. For the first time since leaving the truck, I felt something like relief. But the relief didn't last. At first, it was subtle, the crunch of snow outside carried on the wind. I told myself it was just branches breaking, ice shifting, but then came the rhythm, slow, deliberate, like footsteps circling the cabin. My pulse quickened. I leaned closer to the window, brushing frost with my sleeve, but saw only swirling white. Nothing. No one. The noise stopped. The silence was worse. I tried to focus on the fire, its crackle masking my unease. Minutes dragged. Then 3 sharp knocks. Not random, not wind. Knuckles on wood. They echoed through the cabin, rattling inside my chest. My breath caught. Someone or something was at the door. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. The knocks came again, slower this time, almost playful. I forced myself up, crept toward the door, and pressed my ear against it. Nothing but the blizzard howling outside. No voice, no plea for help. Just waiting, I whispered. Hello? My own voice sounded alien, swallowed by the storm. No reply. When I finally gathered the courage to unhook the latch and open the door just a crack, the wind screamed in, biting at my skin. But the porch was empty. No footprints. Just snow blowing sideways, erasing everything within seconds. I slammed the door shut, heart racing, every hair on my body standing on end. I backed away, eyes darting around the dim cabin, suddenly aware of how fragile those thin walls were. The fire popped, startling me. I laughed under my breath, a shaky, humorless sound. But as the minutes passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that the storm wasn't the only thing pressing against this place. That something had found me, and it wasn't going to leave. Sleep was impossible. Every groan of the cabin, every whistle of the wind felt like a signal I wasn't alone. My flashlight beam skimmed across the wooden walls, and that's when I noticed it. Scratches. At first I thought they were age marks, but then I saw the words carved deep into the planks, gouged with desperation. Don't open the door. It waits in the storm. My throat tightened. The words were jagged, uneven, as if carved in haste. I followed the marks along the walls, seeing more, random slashes, strange symbols, overlapping like layers of warnings left behind by different hands. I tried to convince myself it was just paranoia, maybe a prank by hunters or trappers. But the cabin told a different story. The overturned chair by the table, the canned food left open, mold frozen in its tin, the blanket tangled on the cot as if someone had leapt from it in the middle of the night. Whoever had been here before me hadn't left calmly. Then came the sound again, this time closer, heavier, slow steps dragging across the snow outside, circling like a predator sizing up its prey. I killed the fire instantly, plunging myself into darkness, hoping silence would make me invisible. My breath fogged in the freezing air, loud in my ears. The steps stopped right at the porch. Wood creaked under the weight of something standing just outside. My body locked up, frozen as solid as the snow. For a moment, the storm seemed to hush, the way a forest goes quiet when a predator walks through. I grabbed a chair and wedged it beneath the door handle, heart pounding so hard it hurt. My flashlight shook in my hand as I scanned the windows, half expecting a face to be pressed against the glass. Instead, I heard scratching. Slow, deliberate, dragging claws against the outside wall. It traveled along the length of the cabin, circling, searching. I pressed my back to the wall, knees drawn up to my chest, every nerve on fire. The carvings weren't warnings, they were confessions. Whoever had written them had heard the same sounds, felt the same presence, and none of them had escaped. The scratching grew bolder as the night deepened until it became pounding, fists or claws hammering against the thin wooden walls. Each strike sent vibrations through the floor, rattling my teeth. I pressed harder against the door as though my body weight alone could hold it shut, but I knew the cabin wouldn't last. The thing outside wasn't trying to break in all at once. It was testing me, wearing me down, waiting for me to make a mistake. The fire had long since died, and the cold gnawed at my skin, sinking deep into my bones. My breath came in ragged bursts, each one visible in the dark. I couldn't sit there any longer. If I stayed, I'd freeze, or worse, I'd be found. My mind raced through choices: stay barricaded, trapped like a rat in a box, or step into the storm and take my chances. Neither felt like survival, but one at least meant movement. I yanked on my coat, slung my pack over my shoulder, and with trembling hands pulled the chair away from the door. The pounding stopped. Silence pressed in heavier than the storm. I hesitated only a moment before tearing the door open and plunging outside. The blizzard swallowed me instantly. Snow blinded me, stung my face like knives. I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, but I forced myself forward, stumbling, gasping, every step a war. Behind me, through the roar of the wind, I heard it. Footsteps heavier than mine, keeping pace. No matter how fast I pushed, it was always just a breath behind. Shapes loomed out of the storm, trees twisting like specters. But then, light. A faint glow cutting through the white. Headlights. A vehicle on the highway. I stumbled toward it, legs buckling, lungs burning. My body wanted to give out, but the fear drove me harder. Just as my knees gave way, I burst onto the edge of the road, collapsing in the snow as a pair of blinding beams cut through me. A truck's horn blared, brakes squealing. I thought I was saved. But even as the driver pulled me up, shoving me into the warmth of the cab, I swore I felt it, fingers brushing the back of my coat. A whisper lost in the wind. The storm hadn't been the only thing chasing me. The heat inside the truck felt unreal, almost painful against my frozen skin. I collapsed against the seat, shivering so hard I could barely speak. The driver, a gruff man with a thick beard and tired eyes, kept glancing at me, asking if I was hurt. All I could do was nod, too drained to form words. He said I was lucky, that no one else should have been out there on a night like this. He hadn't seen another set of headlights for hours. I wanted to tell him about the cabin, the knocks, the footsteps, but the words stuck in my throat. What would I even say? That the storm itself was alive? That something stalked me through the snow? I glanced down at my coat, stiff with frost, and that's when I saw it. Long, jagged tears across the back. The fabric shredded in places where I knew I hadn't fallen. The kind of marks that looked like claws. My stomach dropped. The trucker didn't notice. He just drove on, muttering about the roads. But I couldn't stop staring at those rips, my heart hammering all over again. Because whatever had touched me out there in the storm, it hadn't stayed behind. In Alaska, when a dog refuses to move and you listen, doesn't matter how experienced you are, how tough you think you've got it, out there instincts keep you alive. And sled dogs, their instincts are generations deep. So when my lead dog, Banshee, locked up on the trail outside Nome, hackles raised and teeth bared, I should have turned the sled around right then and there. But I didn't. I was doing a solo run, prepping for the Iditarod, cutting a new loop I'd mapped myself. I'd run that terrain dozens of times, but this stretch, this patch of forest just past the ridgeline, it wasn't on any of my usual routes. The map showed it as dense timber. Nothing unusual. Just another cluster of black spruce and snow-blanketed earth. But the moment we neared it, something changed. The dogs froze. Every last one of them. No barking, no whimpering, just a low, guttural growl from Banshee. And I swear the air, it got heavier. The silence wasn't quiet. It was watching me. I didn't know it yet, but whatever was in those trees, and it had already seen me. And it wasn't planning to let me leave. The day had started like any other. Cold enough to sting your teeth when you breathe deep. Sky a flat sheet of overcast gray and the snow crunching under the sled like brittle glass. I was about 12 miles north of Nome working a solo circuit. I'd been conditioning the team for weeks, pushing harder every run, testing routes that weren't crowded with tourists or amateur mushers. I needed space. Stillness. A trail that made you earn it. I'd mapped out a loop that curved near the Kigluake Mountains, not far from an old mining site. A section of it crossed into a wooded patch I hadn't run before. Remote, sure, but that's how I liked it. No cell service, no one for miles. Just me, the sled, and the dogs. Banshee led the pack. Smartest dog I've ever handled. She could read terrain before I even spotted the grade. And if something felt off, she'd let me know. Today, though, she was quiet. Focused, but tense. The other dogs were wound up too. Ears twitching at every gust of wind. Their noses up like they were sniffing something I couldn't smell. Around mid-afternoon, the trail started to narrow. The trees pressed in close, darker than I expected. And the quiet, it wasn't normal. Out here you get used to silence, sure, but there's always something. Distant birds, wind through the branches, even the groan of the snow settling. This was empty, dead air. I stopped for a moment, pulling off my gloves, rubbing the feeling back into my fingers. That's when I realized I hadn't seen any animal tracks. No moose, no rabbits, not even a damn squirrel. Just untouched snow, thick and clean, like nothing had passed through in days. Maybe longer. Still I pressed on. The light was starting to drop fast. Winter runs always play tricks on your timing. The sun doesn't give you warning, just drops like a rock behind the hills. Then I saw it. The tree line. Dense. The kind of dark that eats up your headlamp. Looked like a wall of black straight ahead. And as we approached it, I felt the sled start to slow. Not from terrain. The dogs were stopping, one by one. They dropped pace. Then Banshee halted completely and growled, deep and low and like she'd seen a ghost. At first, I thought maybe I'd hit a patch of rough ice. Sometimes they freeze over with a crust so slick the dogs hesitate. But when I stepped off the sled to check, my boots sank clean through powder. No ice, no obstacle. Just untouched snow. The growling didn't stop. Banshee was locked in place, front legs braced, her eyes fixed straight into the trees. The other dogs shuffled nervously behind her, ears flat, bodies low. A few let out small whines, and that's when I smelled it. Rot. Not just animal rot. Not the musky scent of a carcass in decay. This was sour, like meat left out in the sun, mixed with something worse, something human. I scanned the tree line, headlamp flicking between the thick trunks, catching glints of frost and branches. Then something caught my eye, hanging just inside the woods, swaying slightly in the wind. Fur. Or cloth. I couldn't tell. It looked torn, faded, tangled in the branches about 10 feet up. Too high for any ordinary debris. Gee, Banshee, gee! I barked, trying to nudge her forward. She didn't budge. That's when I felt it, unlike a hand grazing the back of my neck. Not wind, presence. You spend enough time alone in the wilderness, you get tuned to things that don't belong. And that moment, as standing there at the edge of those woods, every cell in my body screamed leave. But pride's a funny thing. I'd mapped this loop. I had my GPS, I was on schedule. Maybe the dogs just smelled a predator. Lynx, maybe. I grabbed my flashlight from the sled bag, clicked it on, and started walking toward the woods myself. 3 steps in, I heard movement, a shift. Like weight on snow, slow, deliberate. I turned, shining the light in the direction of the sound. Nothing. But the air was thicker now, like breathing through wool. I could hear my own heartbeat hammering like a drum in my ears. Behind me, the dogs erupted, howling, barking, some pulling back hard enough to snap their necklines. I turned and ran back, nearly slipping as I scrambled to the sled. I looked back once more at the trees, but whatever had moved, it was gone, and I had a feeling it wasn't done with me yet. I decided to camp there, not in the woods and no chance in hell, but close enough that I could mark the location. Maybe finish the loop in the morning when the dogs calmed down. I staked the team in a tight circle, noses inward, so they could keep watch. Even then, Banshee wouldn't lie down. She just stood there, staring toward the trees like she was daring them to move. I set the tent fast, hands shaking more from nerves than cold. I told myself it was just a predator. Maybe a carcass deeper in the woods throwing off the dogs. Maybe a bear den I didn't spot on the topo map. But I didn't believe it. I've run into bears, wolves, hell, even a wolverine once. But this wasn't an animal. It got worse after dark. The wind died, but I kept hearing crunches, like footsteps, circling, slow, careful. I unzipped the tent a crack and peered out. The snow was flat, untouched, but I felt it, that something was walking the perimeter just out of sight. Later I woke up, couldn't tell what time it was. The kind of dark that presses against your eyeballs. And I heard breathing. Right outside the tent wall, not fast, not heavy. Just steady, slow inhales and exhales, like someone standing inches from the nylon. I didn't move. Not a twitch. My rifle was beside me, but something told me not to grab it. Like whatever was out there was waiting for me to break the silence first. Then, the breathing stopped. I held my breath, and that's when I heard whispering. Low. Garbled. Not in English. Not even a language I recognized. Just these rhythmic, muttering tones like chanting through water. My skin went cold. I clenched my jaw and waited, counting heartbeats. I must have passed out at some point. Stress, exhaustion, I don't know. But I jolted awake sometime later, freezing, drenched in sweat. And the first thing I noticed? The tree line. It was closer. At least 20 feet closer than before. I was sure of it. Trees don't move. Not like that. But there they were. looming now, casting shadows over the sled. The forest was creeping in, closing the gap, and I didn't know if morning would come fast enough. At first light, I was ready to leave. The dogs were restless, pulled taut on their lines, eager to run like they sensed escape. I didn't argue. I packed fast, my fingers numb and clumsy, heart hammering louder than usual. As we pushed away from the camp, I glanced back one last time. Something was standing in the trees, tall, thin, wrapped in something fur. Maybe, but it wasn't any animal I'd seen. It held itself upright, limbs unnaturally long, almost too flexible. What sent a shiver through me was how it mimicked my stance perfectly. Rifle slung over its shoulder, hat tipped low, just like me. I blinked. When I looked again, it was gone. The run back was a blur. The dog surged ahead, but I was watching every shadow, every whisper of movement. The forest behind us seemed alive, watching. Hours later, we reached the outpost. The dogs collapsed instantly, exhausted beyond reason. I checked my gear, the only thing that mattered, my rifle. It was gone. Except hanging from my shoulder was another, older, rusted, covered in scratches and faded initials I didn't recognize. Cold dread curled in my stomach. How had this rifle gotten there? I never saw it before. Whoever or whatever had followed me had left it behind. I wanted to believe it was some trick of the mind, a hallucination fueled by cold and fear. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. That shadow in the woods hadn't just seen me. It had learned me. And whatever it was waiting for me to return. Back in Nome, I sought out a local trapper to tell him what happened. When I mentioned the woods near Kigluake Ridge, his face went pale. He lowered his voice, eyes flicking to the floor. "You went near the Nunakswak," he said. "Forest watchers. They mimic what they see, remember faces. Hunters avoid those woods. Old stories say they're spirits or something older." I asked if they'd come after me now. He shrugged, heavy with meaning. "Only if you go back. Or if they decide they like you." That night I couldn't shake the feeling. Banshee growled low in her kennel, staring out the window. I looked outside. The snow was freshly fallen and untouched, except for a second set of footprints, mine walking away from the house. I don't know what followed me back from those woods, but I know this: I'm not the only one out here anymore. And sometimes when the wind howls just right, I swear I hear whispering at the edge of the tree line, waiting, watching. I've worked road crews in some of the worst conditions you can imagine. Freezing rain in Oregon, desert wind in Nevada, black ice highways outside of Fairbanks, but nothing prepared me for what I saw out on mile 146. Middle of the Alaskan tundra. No towns, no cell towers, just silence and cold so deep it hums in your teeth. We were part of a state highway repair team, patching up a section that got washed out by a spring thaw. 6-man crew, 3-day shifts. Generator-powered lights and truck heaters were the only things keeping us alive. And then the lights started. At first I thought it was a weird atmospheric thing. Auroras or some distant headlights refracted off the snow. But this wasn't green and dancing. This was orange, low to the ground. Moving slow, steady, didn't blink, didn't waver. The first time I saw it, I was alone doing a check on the barricades. Figured it was a snowmobile. I radioed to see if anyone was out near the tree line. No one answered. The thing is, it wasn't snowing that night. Wind was dead calm, and the light moved straight against it. That's when I realized I wasn't seeing a reflection. We were stationed about 60 miles north of Tuk, working a remote section of Highway 5. It's not even paved that far out, just gravel and packed snow in the winter. Most of the guys rotated in on 6-day shifts. Me, I stayed for the full month. The extra pay was worth it, and I didn't have much waiting for me back home anyway. Our setup was basic: 3 trucks, a small mobile trailer, floodlights, fuel drums, and a portable radio tower. Nights lasted forever. Sometimes you'd forget what daylight felt like until you blinked at breakfast and saw a smear of blue across the horizon. You learn to respect the quiet out here. It's not peaceful, it's absolute. Like the land's just waiting for you to make a mistake. On the second week, I saw the light again. This time, I wasn't alone. Rick, one of the older guys, was just finishing his shift. I was on rotation to monitor the traffic cones and keep the generators fueled. Around 2 a.m., I looked out past the tree line and spotted that same orange glow, maybe 100 yards out, moving slow behind a ridge. It wasn't tall like a headlight beam, more like A low sphere. Floating. I tapped the radio. Rick, you out there? Static. I tried again. Nothing. I stepped out of the truck to get a better view. The cold bit into my face immediately, -30 at least. But that damn light was still moving, steady, silent. It dipped behind the ridge, and never came out. I waited. Watched for 5 full minutes, expecting it to crest the hill again. It didn't. By morning, I figured it had to be some kind of atmospheric trick. Maybe headlights from a distant plow bouncing off the snow. Maybe a pilot light from one of the fuel tanks flaring weird. I kept trying to logic my way through it, but that's when it started bothering me. Nothing out here should have been moving at that hour. There's no other work site for miles, no traffic, no houses, no tourists, no hikers. Hell, even the wildlife stays underground in that kind of cold. And yet, something had been out there, floating, watching. The next night, I didn't want to look. I told myself I'd stay in the truck, crank the heat, maybe listen to a podcast or two. Let the dark be dark. But that's the thing about fear. It doesn't need your permission. It just waits. Around 1:45 a.m., the generator started sputtering. I swore under my breath and threw on my gear, heading out to check the fuel lines. Rick was already outside, standing near the trailer, smoking like always. He didn't say anything, just nodded as I passed. While I topped off the tank, something caught my eye over the ridge. Another light. This one was closer, brighter. Same color, burnt orange, like fire behind a fogged-up lens. It hovered near the same ridge as before, but moved differently this time, slow, hesitant, like it was searching. I pointed. Rick, you seeing this? He turned, took one look, and I swear something in his posture just collapsed. He dropped the cigarette, didn't say a word, just walked back into the trailer. That's when the light moved again. It floated behind the ridge and disappeared. But I counted. 1, 2, 3 minutes. Still no reappearance. Nothing moves that slow without showing itself again. It didn't make sense. When I finally went back inside, Rick was sitting on the edge of his bunk staring at the floor. You okay? I asked. He didn't answer at first. Then, barely above a whisper, he said, I thought I saw her. Who? My wife. I didn't know what to say. I'd heard she passed a couple years ago, cancer, I think. He never talked about it. I went out to fuel the generator earlier, he continued, and I swear to God I saw her standing near the trees. Same coat, same look in her eyes. She was just watching me. I waited for him to laugh it off, say it was the cold or a dream or something, but he didn't. She waved at me, he said, and I almost waved back. The room felt 20 degrees colder after that. Whatever Rick had seen, it wasn't his wife, and that's when it clicked. Those lights weren't just lights, they were showing us something. Using faces we trusted. The foreman blamed it on fatigue. We'd been pulling long shifts, sure, and the cold can mess with your head. But Rick wasn't the only one seeing things anymore. That night, the radio started cutting out. It began with static, random, short bursts. Then full silence. No weather alerts. No crew check-ins. Just the low hum of dead air. By midnight, a blizzard rolled in without warning. Forecast had said clear skies, but within 20 minutes we were blind past 10 feet. We locked ourselves in our trucks, cranked the heaters, and waited it out. No one moved. No one dared. I tried to sleep, but I felt it. Something brushing against my truck. Not wind. Not snow. Something dragging. Slow. Deliberate. Like fingers across metal. I froze. Breath caught in my throat. Reached for the radio. Nothing but static again. I pressed my face to the window, trying to see through the frost. That's when I saw them. 3 lights. Orange. Flickering. Hovering low. Just outside the circle of visibility. They didn't move like vehicles or flares. They just hung there. Like they were waiting for me to come out. I stayed still. Didn't blink. Then they vanished. All at once. When the blizzard passed and morning finally came, we stepped outside to assess the damage. The first thing I noticed were the marks. Long drag lines across the snow. Not tire tracks, not boot prints, just 2 perfect trails stretching from the fuel tank to the edge of the trees. Like something had been pulled. And then we saw the loader. It was one of our smaller rigs, an old bobcat we used for clearing berms. The back panel was torn clean off, wires dangling like ripped veins. No footprints around it, no tracks. Just those 2 drag lines. The foreman gathered everyone, said we were shutting down for 24 hours. Just weather-related stress, he told us. We'll resume once things stabilize, but nobody argued. Not even Rick. That night we locked up early. Everyone kept to their bunk or their truck. Nobody joked. Nobody smoked. Even the silence felt heavier. At 2:11 a.m., someone screamed. We rushed outside. One of the crew, Jason, was gone. No footprints. No sign of a struggle, just his parka, lying open in the snow. After Jason disappeared, everything got worse. Search efforts were pointless. The storm had dumped another foot of snow by morning, covering any trace he might have left behind. The foreman called off the search, said it was too dangerous to keep looking. We'll wait for daylight, he said, but I could tell he wasn't sure. That night I couldn't sleep. Something in the silence was screaming. I started hearing voices, at first faint, whispers just at the edge of hearing. Names I recognized. My dad, old friends, people who couldn't possibly be here. I'd shake my head, tell myself it was exhaustion, that the cold was messing with my mind. But the voices kept coming louder, clearer. One night, while I was recording a voice note on my phone, figuring if something happened to me, at least someone would know I heard it, a woman's voice calling my name soft, almost pleading. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The wind was calm. The stars were swallowed by clouds. That's when I saw it again. The light, floating low just beyond the tree line. This time it flickered like a flare, almost like it was trying to signal me. I followed it. Every step crunching in the snow, breath freezing in my lungs. It led me to the edge of a frozen lake, a vast sheet of ice stretching as far as I could see. The light hovered there, reflecting on the ice like a fire trapped beneath glass, and then the ice cracked. Slowly at first. Then a deep rumble like something massive stirring beneath. I froze. The water beneath the ice bubbled and shifted. The light seemed to pulse alive. Something enormous, inhuman was down there, just waiting. I wanted to run, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. The last thing I remember before I blacked out was the ice breaking beneath me, the cold water swallowing my scream. I woke up hours later, half submerged on the frozen shore, shivering uncontrollably. A search crew had found me just before dawn, a snowcat team sent out after the storm cleared. I couldn't tell them what happened. How could I? Who'd believe a man who chased lights into the tundra and almost drowned beneath the ice? I left Alaska the next day. Never looked back. Some say those lights are just illusions, the cold playing tricks on lonely minds. But I know better. They're watching, waiting, drawing you out into the emptiness until there's nothing left but silence and frostbite. I've seen the way they move, slow and purposeful, against the wind and all reason, like they're alive. Alive in a way we can't understand. If you ever find yourself staring across the tundra and see lights moving where there should be none, don't follow them. Don't even blink, because those lights know you're watching, and that's all they need. And now the truth is out. That final account, the one hidden deep in archived reports, confirmed the whispers survivors had carried for years. In one small Alaskan town, the disappearances weren't chance and the silence wasn't natural. Something had taken root there. Something officials quietly sealed away, ensuring the secret would never leave the North. Tonight you've heard it. These 8 new disturbing true Alaskan small-town horror stories remind us that isolation doesn't only separate people from the world, it buries the evidence of what hunts in the dark. From coastal villages to forgotten mining camps, the horror was never in the landscape itself, but in what moved unseen through it. So now I'll leave you with this question. If silence is warning, not peace, what might already be waiting in the quiet around you? Make sure to subscribe to Midnight Murmurs for more true horror stories that were never meant to be heard. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if this happened to you?